In this episode, we're going to talk about data retention, which is the set of decisions and controls that determine how long data is kept, where it is kept, and what happens when it is supposed to be removed. Retention sounds like a purely administrative topic, but in AI systems it becomes a direct security issue because the longer you keep data, the more chances it has to leak, be misused, be copied, or become part of artifacts you did not intend. Retention also connects to expectations in law because users and organizations often have rules about how long certain data may be stored, and they may have obligations to delete it when it is no longer needed. The tricky part for beginners is that deletion is not always as clean as it sounds, and forgetting is not the same as deletion. You can delete a record from one database and still have it exist in backups, logs, caches, derived datasets, and sometimes in model artifacts that were created from it. The goal in this episode is to learn how to think about retention policies, what deletion realistically means, what forgetting limits look like in AI, and how compliance-driven policies shape safe system design. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first concept is to treat retention as a purposeful design choice rather than a default. Many systems collect data and keep it forever because no one made a clear decision to do otherwise. In security, that is a quiet disaster because it increases the blast radius of every incident. If an attacker gets access to your data store, they gain not only today's data, but years of history. In AI, long retention also increases the chance that sensitive data finds its way into training sets or evaluations, because historical data is often reused for improvements. A safer starting point is to define why each category of data is kept and for how long it is actually needed. For example, raw telemetry might be needed for investigations for a certain window, while aggregated metrics might be useful longer. Ticket transcripts might be needed to resolve the ticket and to support short-term quality reviews, but not indefinitely. When you treat retention as purpose-based, you collect less, store less, and reduce long-term risk. Deletion is the next concept, and beginners should learn that deletion is both technical and procedural. Technically, you delete data from primary stores, but you also need to consider replicas, indexes, caches, and backups. Procedurally, you need to ensure deletion requests are authorized, logged, and executed reliably. In AI pipelines, deletion is complicated by the number of places data can flow. A single incident narrative might be stored in a ticket system, copied into a case management system, embedded into a retrieval index, summarized into a report, and included in a dataset used for training or evaluation. If you delete only the ticket entry, you have not truly removed the content from the ecosystem. A responsible approach is to maintain lineage so you can identify downstream dependencies and apply deletion consistently across those dependencies. This is why traceability is not a luxury. It is what makes deletion possible. Now let's talk about forgetting limits, because this is where AI can feel unintuitive. In everyday life, forgetting means a person no longer remembers a detail. In AI systems, forgetting can mean several different things depending on where the data lived. If the data was only in a prompt and not stored, forgetting might mean the system does not retain that prompt history. If the data was stored in a database, forgetting might mean deletion from the database and from logs and backups. If the data was used to create derived artifacts, forgetting might mean regenerating those artifacts without the data. The hardest case is when the data influenced a trained model. Trained models do not store training data as neat records you can delete like files. They store learned patterns in their parameters, and while they can sometimes memorize specific strings, the influence of any single record is usually diffuse. That means you cannot assume you can remove one record's influence from a model without retraining or using specialized techniques. This is what people mean by forgetting limits. It can be difficult to guarantee complete removal of influence once data has been used for training. This does not mean you are helpless. It means you plan ahead so you do not put sensitive data into places where deletion is unrealistic. One practical policy is to strictly control what data is eligible for training. You treat training datasets as curated assets, not as a dump of everything you collected. You apply redaction and minimization before data enters those datasets. You also keep records of what went into each training run so you can decide whether retraining is required if a deletion request arrives. Another practical approach is to separate personal data from training entirely unless there is a clear, approved reason to include it. If you avoid including PII in training, you avoid the hardest forgetting problem. This is a good example of how minimization and retention strategy work together to reduce risk. Compliance-driven policies are the third part of this title, and they matter because retention decisions are often constrained by legal, regulatory, or contractual requirements. Some data must be retained for a minimum period for audit or legal hold reasons. Other data must be deleted within a certain time frame. Some data cannot be transferred to certain locations. Beginners do not need to memorize specific laws to grasp the principle. The principle is that retention is not purely a technical choice. It is shaped by obligations, and those obligations can conflict. For example, an organization might need to retain security logs for a certain period for investigation and compliance, but it might also need to delete personal data when it is no longer necessary. A mature retention program handles these conflicts by categorizing data, defining retention schedules, applying role-based access controls, and creating procedures for exceptions like legal holds. The AI twist is that data might be replicated into additional systems, so compliance policies must follow the data wherever it goes. A critical retention concept in AI systems is the distinction between raw data and derived data. Raw data might include full log entries or full ticket transcripts. Derived data might include extracted features, summaries, embeddings, or aggregated metrics. Derived data can be less sensitive, but it can still carry privacy risk, especially if it is linkable to individuals or if it preserves unique patterns. Responsible retention policies define how long you keep raw versus derived forms and under what conditions. Often, you keep raw data for the minimum time needed for investigations, then keep only derived summaries that support longer-term trends. But you must validate that the derived data is truly safer and does not allow easy re-identification. Otherwise, you are keeping a long-lived shadow copy of sensitive information under a different name. This is why retention must include de-identification and linkability thinking, not just storage duration. Backups and logs deserve special attention because they are common places where retention policies fail. Backups are designed to keep data, sometimes for long periods, and they can be difficult to delete from selectively. Logs are often verbose and may capture sensitive payloads unintentionally, and they may be shipped to multiple systems for monitoring. A beginner-friendly rule is that if you do not control backups and logs, you do not truly control retention. Responsible design includes limiting what gets logged, masking sensitive fields and logs, and setting retention policies on log stores that match the sensitivity of the content. For backups, responsible design might include shorter backup retention for sensitive datasets, encryption with strict key controls, and processes for handling deletion requests that affect backups, such as expiring backup sets on a schedule. You cannot always surgically delete a single record from a backup, but you can design your backup strategy so that sensitive content does not persist indefinitely. Another important retention issue is caches and indexes used for retrieval. In AI systems, you may build an index of documents so the model can retrieve relevant passages. That index might include embeddings or text chunks that contain sensitive data. If you delete the original document but forget to rebuild the index, the model may still retrieve the deleted content. This is a classic retention failure in AI pipelines. A responsible approach treats indexes as derived datasets with their own retention and deletion rules. When content is deleted or updated, you update or rebuild the index accordingly. You also record index versions so you know which retrieval corpus was used for which outputs. This ties back to traceability. If an output is questioned, you can identify whether it came from an outdated index that still contained a record that should have been deleted. When you put these pieces together, retention becomes a system of controls rather than a single policy document. You categorize data by sensitivity and purpose. You define retention periods for each category and enforce them through automation where possible. You limit data flows so sensitive data does not spread into unnecessary systems. You maintain lineage so deletion can be propagated to derived datasets and indexes. You recognize forgetting limits and prevent sensitive data from entering hard-to-delete artifacts like training runs unless absolutely necessary. And you build monitoring so you can detect when retention policies are not being followed, such as data that persists past its expiration date. In security, policies that are not enforced are wishful thinking. Retention must be enforceable. By the end of this episode, the main takeaway should be that retention is a security control that shapes risk over time. Deletion is not just removing a record. It is removing it from the ecosystem, including copies, logs, caches, and derived artifacts. Forgetting limits mean that once data has influenced a trained model, complete removal can be hard, so you prevent that situation through minimization and strict training data governance. Compliance-driven policies add constraints that require careful categorization and procedures like legal holds. When you design retention intentionally and enforce it across the whole AI pipeline, you reduce breach impact, reduce leakage risk, and make your system more trustworthy because you can honestly say what you keep, why you keep it, and what you do when it is time to let it go.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.